Hi, folks. I just wanted to spend a little bit of time working through a few slides that I put together from the first chapter in this textbook. For some reason, the publisher sends PowerPoint slides packages to us for each chapter in this textbook, and I'll be utilizing those packages, although I'll be revising them and making them different as we go along. But for some reason, the first chapter has no slides, so this is entirely my own authorship, and I hope you find some use in it. There aren't too many slides here. The author starts out first with a discussion of the purpose of social work and its approach. According to the educational policy, the Council on Social Work Education, our practice is guided by a focus upon the person and environment framework, the global perspective, and the knowledge based on scientific inquiry. First, about the person and environment. Historically speaking, social work really had kind of two fields of thought or two approaches to working with clients 100 years ago or so. We had the individual treatment casework method, basically, which utilizes something of the medical model that assumes that there is something in the client that needs to be fixed or altered, and the social worker builds a relationship with that client and uses methods to change those things so that the client is able to function more successfully in society. The other method, which I guess I could call it the social treatment method, which really kind of got its start with Jane Addams and the settlement house movement, really looks at the environment that the person exists in and looks to the institutions that oppress the individual, also the kinds of things that prevent the individual from fully utilizing the parts of the environment that would make life more meaningful for him or her, and instead of working on the individual, works on changing the social environment, or at least in improving the client's ability to make use of the institutions in society. So those were the two frameworks for intervention. The casework model kind of began to become much more in vogue, I suppose, because in 100 years or so ago, the socialism was kind of spreading all over Europe and had come to America as well, and there was a lot of socialist influences kind of pushing for more involvement in our political life. If you've read The Jungle, you're familiar with that. And so the social treatment method became very unpopular. In fact, it's one of the ways that years ago social workers began to be associated with socialists and communism and different things like that. That still rears its head every now and then in people's thinkings. But in any event, these two methods, both of which had valid approaches, needed to be integrated in one way or another. And I believe it was Carol Meyer or was it Helen Harris Perlman? I believe it was Carol Meyer who came up with the person and environment framework originally, and really kind of integrated those two perspectives so that we don't look at the person, we don't look at the environment, we look at both. And one significant factor to consider in this is that it's not just the environment affecting the person, but the person also impacts the environment in which he or she lives as well. Of course, now that we have instantaneous communication and social media and those kinds of things, where we almost immediately find out what's going on in an individual's life through, well, Twitter or Facebook or whatever the kinds of ways we communicate with each other. Even email seems slow these days now. So we have developed this global perspective that really we have to implement, rather, a global perspective because really we have the ability to connect with people all around the world, and the things that go on in Egypt or in Russia or in South Africa impact what happens in the United States and what happens in our community, and vice versa because of that. And so we've had to become more focused upon a global perspective and understanding the kinds of things that go on with cultures all around the world. Now, as far as scientific inquiry is concerned, it's an interesting topic, I think, in the field of social work, because there's a lot of people that believe that we have spent too much time thinking about cases and anecdotes and those kinds of things over the years, and basing too much of our practice on what has worked for other people, without really looking at whether or not it works in general for our clients. Morley Glicken writes a textbook that I use actually in an introductory course that I teach, and I'm actually teaching this semester as well. And he says, he quotes a person by the name of Shea, who wrote for a psychiatric journal, saying that no amount of wishful thinking about the scientific method is going to alter the fact that in much of psychiatry, and Glicken adds social work as well, an indispensable element in the therapeutic process is what goes on between the therapist and the patient, the knowledge, understanding, rapport, trust, and confidence that builds up over time. Note there that that particular thinker is saying that the relationship is really a key factor that doesn't have a whole lot to do with scientific research. But Glicken says that he believes one of the serious problems in social work has been that we accept knowledge that hasn't been well documented, or that has become mythologized through long acceptance without rigorous evaluation or debate. And he actually identifies for what he calls social work mythologies that I think are interesting just to tell you about. First was the belief that having a trained helping professional who has gone through a professional program and is licensed to practice provides more effective help than an untrained, unlicensed professional. We say, of course they do, but Glicken says that there have been some reports and studies that suggest that there's really no relationship among training, licensing, and experience, and that empathy goes a long way to filling in the gaps and can be much more effective in helping another person. Using only trained people in a study limits the amount of information we can provide to consumers of research and may suggest unwarranted findings that confuse us, Glicken believes. Another social work mythology: the longer a client is seen by a social worker, the more likely the important life questions will be uncovered, and this will lead to better social functioning. Says there's really no relationship between length of treatment and better social functioning in the studies that he's familiar with. A third belief: early forms of trauma inevitably lead to problems later in life, and he questions this when he references the resilience studies that show that there are individuals who, even as children, who are able to move through and move through great trauma and difficult times and still function very effectively. So there certainly, depending upon one's life stage of development and things like this, is something we're going to be looking at over time, is going to impact the person's ability to deal with trauma. But Glicken's point is that it's sort of a myth that everybody who's lived with trauma is going to be somehow affected in their adult lives, and that's not always true. Now, you're familiar probably with the adverse childhood experiences studies, which does demonstrate quite the opposite. So it's a good debate and a good area to look further into, I think. And I just want to mention one more belief that he says is a myth, and that the therapeutic relationship is the key to successful social work practice. Now, isn't that what we just started out this little thing with? The fellow writing in the psychiatric journal saying that the relationship was really the key. And Glicken questions whether we really understand what is meant by the worker-client relationship. Do we really understand what that means? And certain types of treatment protocols may be more helpful with certain types of problems for certain types of individuals, but not with all clients. And he says it's not because of the quality of the therapeutic relationship. That we really have very limited evidence that relationship is the key to client improvement. So anyway, I guess the message in this is to really kind of look at the kinds of things that we assume to be true, and to really look and see if it's got a basis in science or not. The other thing is that, are we measuring what we do? Are we looking to see if our interventions is really having any kind of impact on our client as we assume it is? Social work practice is actualized, its purpose is actualized by the quest for social and economic justice, the prevention of conditions leading to the limitation of human rights. our work for the elimination of poverty and our work for the enhancement of the quality of life for all persons. One thought about that is the elimination of poverty. If any of you are able to figure out a way to go about eliminating poverty and can implement that, you will be world famous for a long, long time, if not all time. And please mention me in the forward of your book, at least, somebody that planted this idea. I believe that poverty can be eliminated. I really do. Now, I don't have the answer as to how to do that. I do believe, I have a firm belief, first of all, that capitalism has a lot to do with poverty in our culture and our society. And until we are ready as a society to divorce ourselves from our love affair with capitalism, we're not going to eliminate poverty. And that comes out of 20 some years of teaching introduction to social welfare. It's just a firm belief I have. But by the same token, socialism isn't the simple answer to poverty either, as I'm sure you would agree. And so there has to be some way to approach poverty that takes the best of both methods and implements it somehow. And when you come up with that, just remember that you know me. So obviously, the person and environment are very complex and multidimensional, and here you can see a number of different areas that are involved in each. One comment: the spiritual is something which I think has been added lately within the last 10 or 20 years in terms of our focus upon the individual. It's almost as though we've been reluctant or afraid to mention spirituality, but it is a key element in individuals. Even among those who are not religious, so to speak, there's still a spiritual element to their existence. The environment takes on many different aspects in an individual's life, as mentioned here, and all of this really kind of has to be time has to be kind of superimposed on this, both in terms of linear time, the historical, the present, the future orientation, but also in one's chronological age and stage of development. And that's really what this how this text takes a look at the human condition is through the developmental stages. So our behavior is multi-determined. Biopsychosocial is a term that also kind of first came into the lexicon, I think, about 20 years ago or so, that really kind of emphasized the many perspectives that we must consider when working with individuals: the biological, the psychological, and the social environment in which that individual exists. All of these three elements interact and impact the client in many different ways. And again, as I mentioned, spirituality is also becoming another area that is being considered very closely when working with individuals as far as the personal dimension is concerned. With the environment, we look at things such as the beliefs, customs, traditions, and values of the individual's culture. The physical aspects include things like buildings, landscapes, trees, fields. The environment in which a person lives certainly has an impact upon their psyche. Your important dyads with your parent or with your loved ones or with your best friends, with your superiors at work, those kinds of things. Different family systems we might be engaged in, different organizations we might participate in, and also how about the social movements rather that are going on in society. Say, for instance, the gay rights movement or the poor people's movements or Black Lives Matter, those kinds of things. These things occur around us, and through social media, through all different forms of media, we are aware of them and are affected by them. They impact our thinking and our approach to other individuals. And again, all of this is superimposed over the concept of time, linear time, history, our culture's history, and also our age and developmental stage. Now, Yuri Bronfenbrenner is another one of these people that, gosh, I remember studying about him in my bachelor's in social work training, and that was the early 1970s. I mean, that isn't as long ago as it may seem to most of you, but still, he's been around a long time. Some of the things that I was most familiar with Bronfenbrenner had to do with his studies of the kibbutzes in Israel and the effects of communal living upon child development. Here, he's had these levels of systems or categories of systems, let's say, in individuals. Like, I think there's been developed some over the years, but there are 5 levels of systems in his ecological perspective: the self, the mesosystem, which involves the school, the family, church, peers, those groups with which we interact intimately and frequently. The exosystem, which involves the extended family. Nowadays, that really, for most of us, is not a part of our mesosystem, but it is somebody who is distant from us, but still involves us. The media, neighbors, those kinds of things. Then the macro system, which really goes beyond that to look at the ideology of a culture and the customs and habits that we have, are perhaps our religions and spiritual beliefs. And then once again, there's that time orientation, the chronos system, which is the 5th dimension or level of system that impacts our development. It's interesting to me. Something that I noticed in reading this particular section, where the author says that time, the word time, is the most commonly used noun in print in the English language. I think that's very interesting. And it really focuses our attention upon how important time is to us. And also, the second to the most popular term is person. That's the second most common term in print in the English language. In order to have a global perspective, which is something that we need in order to address the issue of diversity and inequality, it's important that we consider some of these aspects that are really kind of important elements to a global perspective. One is the acknowledgement that my worldview is not universally shared. I have to go back this whole list really kind of takes me back to September 11th and people being so deeply offended and confused by how it is that we could be attacked by individuals when we're out there just trying to help the world and we're trying to alleviate poverty and disease all over the world, and then we're attacked. How could that be? Well, how it could be is that, we're not viewed the same way by other cultures in the world as we view ourselves and as we believe they view us. And this is a part of the worldview. We democracy and capitalism and all those kinds of things really are not something that is universally appreciated at all. And so our perspective on the world is not something that's universal. And that's the first thing we have to understand. Secondly, we have to become more and more aware of diversity around the world, what's affecting other cultures, and what the belief systems are of other cultures. We have to have a curiosity about conditions in other parts of the world and to understand where we fit in the global structure. As I mentioned a moment ago, we have to have an awareness of how others view our own society. And we should understand how the world works, including inequality and oppression around the world. The status of women, let's say, in some of the cultures around the world, Africa, Middle East, those kinds of things, is very different from what it is in America and in Western culture. And to understand what lies beneath that and to look for the purpose of those differences is something that's very difficult for us to do because of our belief in equality and human rights. But it's also something that's very essential for us to understand if we're ever going to overcome those differences. Of course, I always love to quote the quotation in the Statue of Liberty. Send me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send me the homeless tempest tossed to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door. Well, not quite exact, but it's pretty close to what the quotation is. And I find a bit of a paternalism in that particular quotation, as nice as it is send me the refuse of your teeming shores. So, what is America? Is it a melting pot, or are we pluralistic? My father was born in Hungary and came over on a boat with my grandmother in 1905 through Ellis Island as an infant. My grandfather had arrived a few months ahead of time to find them a place to live and those kinds of things. It just blows my mind thinking about my grandmother, who I only knew as this rather disabled individual, as an elderly Hungarian woman who had trouble speaking English. It just amazed me to think of her as a young woman coming across the ocean in those days, knowing that she wasn't going to be able to ever go back again as well. Coming across the ocean alone with her infant son. It's just amazing to me. But what did she come here for? What did my grandfather bring his son here for? Was to become an American and to be successful. And I suppose to a certain extent, they were my grandfather. Actually, grandfathers on both sides of my family were coal miners. All the kinds of problems that surfaces didn't really give them a great life, but it probably was better than anything they would have had in Hungary. I don't know, at least economically speaking. My father, when he was raising his sons, was determined that we were all going to get more education than him, and we did. And that, we were more American. We didn't think of ourselves as Hungarian Americans, and we didn't. And one of the things he never taught us the Hungarian language, and I regret that. But he did that because he wanted us to be an American. He didn't want us to be an immigrant son. So when my grandmother came to live with us after she had a stroke and couldn't speak English so well anymore because she lost her powers of speech and was nursed back to health in a Hungarian community in Johnstown, Pennsylvania, we couldn't communicate with our grandmother. We had to talk through him with her. And so we really lost something there. But that's part of the whole thing about being a melting pot, that our ethnic background melts away and is absorbed into this supposedly better system. Well, of course, there's a lot of question about whether assimilation like that is a good thing at all, and what many people prefer is the pluralistic society where, I heard Michael Alexa talk about it. It's a tossed salad where you have all these different elements that each continues to hold on to its own qualities and adds to the bigger picture of the salad, and that's not how America's kind of more like a mushy soup, I think. That's the way a lot of people in America want it to be. But pluralism really implies that each culture brings something different and can maintain many of its own qualities while existing in this larger culture. Something for you to think about how we deal with diversity. We are becoming ethnically and racially diverse in this nation. This is the source, I think, of a lot of gnawing and gnashing of teeth, and politically speaking, as we've seen in our recent elections, I think is a reaction to that. And the anti-immigrant sentiment, which seems to focus more recently upon Latinos and Muslims. If you know anything about our history, of immigration, that anti-immigrant sentiment really accompanied each wave of immigration throughout our history, and each group had its own. Well, it was rejected by society and mistrusted. Very much so. Around the time that my grandparents came over, socialism was spreading all over the world, and these darker skinned, kind of swarthy skinned individuals from Middle Europe, Hungary, and that kind of thing were really mistrusted, and there was a lot of concern about socialism being brought to the nation through these immigrants. So over time, these groups become integrated. One article I read one time suggested that in times of war or in times of economic despair, where we need those immigrant groups, all of a sudden they're American, and they're white too. The Middle Europeans, Southern Europeans like Hungarians and those kinds of things, were actually a separate ethnic group in census data for the first several decades of this century, and so were Jewish people, in fact. Until I think it was World War II, when all of a sudden we all became white in order to, be Americans and fight in the war. We've been encouraged over the years to push our differences under the surface, and what is important for culturally sensitive practice is for us to understand the diversity and the different kinds of things that means from group to group in our caseload. these socially constructed hierarchies in our culture are superimposed on the differences between these groups, and these differences really are largely based on gender, race, and class, and not limited necessarily to those three qualities, but gender, race, and class seems to be the primary qualities with which hierarchies, social hierarchies, are established in our nation. Privilege, this word, means unearned advantage, and members of privileged groups benefit from that privilege but are taught not to see themselves as privileged. And my best example of that comes with Peggy McIntosh's article that you're most likely familiar with. In fact, if you look in the assignment section this week, I included her article on white privilege, and you're probably familiar with this, and I don't mean to insult you by asking you to look at this and read through this, but it's something that I think is worth being reminded of frequently for those of us that are a part of the dominant culture, because those who are not in that dominant culture, and that includes many of you, are already aware of these privileges, and a lot of times Caucasian individuals, white people, don't see it. And it's, as she mentions in her article, it's the same thing as men and women. You know, the line was for a long time during the women's movement, men just don't get it. Men didn't get it because we were raised to believe, well, we were just raised to be blind to patriarchy and to the privileges that we had because we were male. And likewise, the same is true for whites. And I think in any culture where one particular group is dominant over others, this would be true as well. I was very surprised to find that some of the people I worked with when we had a diversity training some years back were very offended by McIntosh's article, and one person said, you know, I don't feel that I should have to apologize for being white. Nobody's asking anybody to apologize for who they are. What we're asking you to do is to be aware of who you are and where that puts you in the hierarchy. Of course, privilege and disadvantage are multidimensional, so that if you're a white male, you may have a leg up over white females. By the same token, a black female would not have the same advantages that a white female might have, or whatever. I mean, all these different groups that we belong to give us a sort of a social placement, and our privilege is based upon that. Exhibit 1.4 in Chapter 1 has a list of the common mechanisms of oppression, and I'm not going to read through them. It's in the book, and you can look at them, but I encourage you to take some time and to look through that list. One of the ones that I think is so very important, and we hear about so much, the myth of scarcity. This is used to pit people against one another, suggesting that resources are limited, and blames the people themselves, poor people, immigrants, whatever it is, for using too many of them. The Mexicans are taking our jobs. Poor people, or it's because of the poverty programs, the anti-poverty programs that we're having, the budget problems we're having. So we're going to put more requirements on Medicaid recipients, or we're going to slash Social Security, or whatever it might be. This is the myth of scarcity, and it is something that in any group where you have a dominant person, the people in power can use that myth to set groups up against each other. So the result of that is the groups fight with each other rather than joining together to challenge the person in authority or the group in authority. So anyway, this list of the mechanisms of oppression in the textbook is really worth your time. Nussbaum also has 10 core capabilities in social justice, things that an individual should be able to count upon if living in a socially just society, to live a normal life course, to have good physical health and adequate nourishment, to be able to exercise the freedom of movement, to be free from assault, to have reproductive choice, to have pleasant sensory experiences, not to have to live with pain, to have appropriate education, to be able to express themselves, to have religious freedom, to experience a full range of emotion, to be able to love and be loved, to think critically and make wise decisions, to live with others with empathy and compassion without discrimination, to show concern for animals, plants, other aspects of nature. This certainly involves our ecology movement. To be able to play and enjoy recreation, and to participate freely in the political process and have equal access to employment and property. These are the core capabilities in a socially just society, and it's one of those things that maybe we can even use this to take a look at our clients' existence to see how they're doing. We know these things. We have this study so that we can do. We know for the purpose of doing. We know that we want to have knowledge about the case. Our author thinks, and I also agree, that it is influenced to one degree or another by the quality of the worker-client relationship. Whether that's the key factor or not, that's something that may be up to debate, but I believe it's pretty clear that our relationship with our client has an impact upon what we achieve and also what we know about the client. And these qualities here that they list are the kinds of qualities that we should have as we approach a client: warmth, authenticity, empathy, those things. We need to know ourselves, what our emotions are, how we're affected by others, what our thinking processes are, how we perceive the world and others around us, and how our social location impacts our view of other persons. We need to be aware of our values and ethics. Those core values: service, which is the social worker's primary goal, to help people in need and to address social problems; social justice, that we challenge social injustices; dignity and the worth of the individual, we respect the inherent dignity and worth of that person; that we recognize the central importance of human relationships; that we behave in a trustworthy manner, that is, we have integrity; and that we practice within the areas of competence and develop and enhance our professional expertise as well. Then we also have, we hope, scientific knowledge and research and its critical use. We would use thoughtful, reflective judgment about alternative views and contradictory information and theories, and we should remain aware of the biases related to group memberships, both our own group membership as well as the biases of other persons' group memberships. So that kind of covers, in a broad way, some of the key elements of the first chapter. I hope that this lecture has been some use to you. You'll find these slides, by the way, as you will all of the slides, in PDF format later on in your Blackboard course, so feel free to go there if you need to refer back to this, or if you want to print them out, or whatever it might be. They may be of some value when you're doing the quizzes. That remains to be seen, but you do need to read to stay up in those quizzes. Okay, if you have any questions, please contact me. Thanks very much.